Honorable Vice President, Honorary Treasurer and members of the Governing Council, distinguished members, officers and staff of the Secretariat, invited guests, professional colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. On the evening of 18th March of last year, I stood before you to deliver my close ranks inaugural speech as your newly elected president. Over 3 months later, on 30th June 2017, I spoke to you again in Dar es Salaam on the occasion of the extraordinary general meeting of the TLS, called hurriedly to discuss government proposals on the reform of the legal profession contained in the notorious Bango Kitita. Alas, that was the last time I would speak to you viva voce. For as you all know, at lunchtime on 7th September 2017, I was followed from Parliament in Dodoma to my home in the Area D neighborhood. Outside my home, 2 gunmen emerged from a car and opened fire at close range with submachine guns. My car was sprayed with 38 rounds of bullets, with 16 of those hitting various parts of my body. Months later, my lead surgeon at the Nairobi hospital, where I was flown for emergency treatment, would tell me this about my injuries, and I wish to quote and unquote. Your injuries were very serious, and you lost a lot of bone and tissue, including whole blocks of muscle in some areas, as well as your entire stock of original blood 3 times over. Miraculously, and thanks to the professionalism of the doctors who attended me, and to my fortitude, I survived to tell the tale. I also survived the dastardly assassination attempt, thanks to you, distinguished members. You were all shocked and dismayed by the brazen attack. You constantly prayed for my survival and recovery. When those with the legal responsibility to ensure my treatment declined to do so, you joined tens of thousands of other good Samaritans, Tanzanian and non-Tanzanian alike, to donate blood and contribute money for my treatment. Many of you took time off your busy schedules to visit me at the Nairobi hospital, where I was hospitalized for 4 months. Your love, affection and solidarity throughout these past 7 months have been an immense source of strength and inspiration for me and my family. The debt I owe you all is unrepairable. Although words alone cannot begin to express my immense gratitude to you, please accept my puny asanteni sana. A word of thanks is, not least, due to your Governing Council, whose term, like mine, is coming to an end. In the 5 months that I led the society, the Governing Council and I accomplished much. We addressed the long-standing concerns about members' subscription fees to both TLS and the East African Law Society. We commenced the construction of the long-delayed Mawakili house. We also overhauled our financial management systems to address the widespread allegations of financial shenanigans. And notwithstanding the deep trauma and shock at having their president gunned down in such a brutal fashion, the Governing Council immediately went to work, mobilizing the members and sister organizations worldwide to contribute money and other resources to ensure my survival. They have continued to do so to this day. I want you to know, distinguished members, that it was a pleasure and indeed a privilege for me to work with and lead such a great team. A round of applause to members of the Governing Council and the Secretariat is entirely in order here. Now, distinguished members, as I recuperate from the 2nd surgery since my early January arrival in Belgium and the 19th overall, I am compelled to bid you farewell from a Belgian hospital bed. It is an unusual farewell address, not least because it is delivered from a hospital bed thousands of miles away. It is also given before the general election is held to elect new office bearers. but then we live in unusual times. You gave me the opportunity to serve you for one term of 12 months. Thanks to assassins' bullets, however, that term was cut short by 7 months. I can only hope and trust that you found some worthy things during my brief tour of duty. Now, please allow me to address some urgent matters facing the society and the nation at large, which, in my view, should frame the debate in this election cycle. Distinguished members, what a tumultuous year this one has been for both the society and the country. When I exhorted you in my close ranks speech to put an end to our silence to and consequent complicity in the crimes against our members and against our people, little did I know that in a few months I would be fighting for my own life in a Nairobi hospital thanks to a hail of automatic gunfire from hired assassins. I am now into my 8th month in hospital, and none of the watu wasiojulikana has been identified, let alone arrested and prosecuted. When I challenged you to let no one touch, arrest, or otherwise harass our lawyers again when they are discharging their professional functions and duties as advocates, I did not think that the rulers of law would take such desperate measures as burgling and stealing equipment or documents from our own members' offices or bombing and damaging them to intimidate our members into silence. These crimes have also not been investigated and no suspects apprehended or dealt with in accordance with the law. And when I warned that none of us was safe if we did not become our brothers and sisters' keeper, only advocate Median Mwale was languishing in a remand prison charged with non-bailable money laundering offenses. Today, as I write these lines, Dr. Ringo W. Tenga, a prominent member of the society and a law teacher to many thousands of us, is in Keko remand prison accused of non-bailable economic offenses. I am reliably informed that another prominent member had a close shave with the same fate after performing notarial duties in a property deal involving his brother. Yet another Kigoma-based member spent this year's Easter weekend in police dungeons for interceding on behalf of a client who was in police custody. Distinguished members, I started my shortened tenure with the threat to the existence of TLS, brazenly made by former Minister Mawakili, still hanging over our collective heads like the sword of Damocles. The threat was soon after made official through the Bango Kitita. Following your loud and clear rejection of the Bango Kitita at the EGM, and after intense lobbying by members, the government appears to have backed down on the Bango Kitita. However, the idea of subordinating TLS to the government and emasculating its independence has not disappeared altogether. On the contrary, as you all know, the idea has recently resurfaced during this election cycle through the Tanganyika Law Society Election Regulations 2018. Thus, in his letter to TLS, which accompanied the purported regulations, the Attorney General, Dr. Adeladus Kilangi, described himself as head of the bar and arrogated unto himself the powers to improve or modify the regulations lawfully enacted by your governing council. By so doing, he disqualified wide categories of lawful members from contesting elective positions within the society, thereby rendering nugatory their statutory rights under the TLS Act. I submit to you, distinguished members, that the Attorney General acted illegally. Although Section 5.2 of the Office of the Attorney General, Discharge of Duties Act 2005, describes the Attorney General as the head of the bar, that description is anomalous. For that provision relates purely to matters of precedence whenever the Attorney General, his deputy, law officers and state attorneys appear in courts of law. The rest of the Act is chiefly concerned with the structure, organization, and modus operandi of the Office of the Attorney General. Needless to say, the bar, meaning we members, is not part of the Office of the Attorney General, nor is the Attorney General an automatic member of the TLS. I urge you, distinguished members, to openly and publicly repudiate the purported election regulations and assert the independence of our National Bar Association and its law-making powers. As we all made clear during last year's EGM called to discuss the Bango Kitita, the independence of lawyers to form and run their own professional organizations is well grounded in both domestic and international law. That independence is central to the rule of law and the liberal constitutional and legal order. We should defend it at all costs. Now, nor are the purported election regulations the only Trojan horse in the struggle against the independent legal profession. There are two other such Trojan horses, namely the Advocates' Professional Conduct and Etiquette Regulations 2018 and the Advocates' Disciplinary and Other Proceedings Rules 2018. Both were published on the same day as the purported election regulations. Enacted in the name of maintaining the proper and efficient administration of justice, the two pieces of subsidiary legislation have imposed such a wide range of offenses against advocates that their net effect may be to muzzle them altogether. To give but one example, it is now the law that an advocate who plans a public statement has to issue a written release or give a statement from a prepared text and to retain a reliable record of the statement. I politely ask, ladies and gentlemen, to what purpose is this stringent and restrictive raft of subsidiary legislation now, if not to chain us head and foot into submission and silence? Therefore, rather than disappear with the Bango Kitita, as some of us mistakenly believe, the threat against the independence of the bar and the legal profession has in fact grown bigger and more insidious. As I predicted during the EGM last June, the road ahead will be bumpy, rocky, and full of difficulties. Our collective resolve will be tested to the extreme. I urge you to reflect on these developments and consider whether that prediction has not been vindicated. Distinguished members, we are not just lawyers. We too are citizens with certain rights and responsibilities afforded to our fellow citizens. In this regard, Article 23 of the UN Basic Principles on the Role of Lawyers of 1990 declares that lawyers, like other citizens, are entitled to freedom of expression, belief, association, and assembly. In our capacity, both as lawyers and citizens, we cannot be indifferent to the plight of our fellow citizens. We cannot be blind to injustice and to breaches of our people's rights as guaranteed by the Constitution and the laws. As Article 14 of the UN Basic Principles makes clear, in promoting the cause of justice, lawyers shall seek to uphold human rights and the fundamental rights recognized by national and international law. That is also the mandatory language of the Professional Conduct and Etiquette Regulations. It is clear as day that our nation is at crossroads. For anyone with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, Tanzania is today a beleaguered multi-party state with the Bill of Rights largely suspended by presidential decree and political parties in limbo. That, notwithstanding the staggering number of independently owned media outlets, not to mention the ubiquitous electronic social media, media freedoms are under the most sustained and vicious attack since the nationalization of the independent media in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. With the passage, firstly, of the Electronic and Postal Communications Act 2009 and later the Cyber Crimes Act 2015, hundreds of bloggers or users of electronic social media have been arrested across the country, transported to Dar es Salaam, and tortured in secret locations in the city before being charged in the courts of law with a bewildering array of cyber offenses. Even before the Media Services Act 2017 was enacted last year, newspapers, radio and television stations were already being shut down or heavily fined, journalists arrested or physically assaulted or outright killed. It is not just Daudi Mwangosi, the Channel 10 anchorman killed in Iringa 7 years ago, or Absalom Kibanda, the New Habari Corporation editor, abducted and brutally tortured a short while later. It is also Azori Gwanda, the Mwananchi reporter, missing since last November after being picked up by unidentified persons in an unmarked car. And it is also Ansbeth Ngurumo, the prominent editor and columnist, who has been driven into exile in Finland for fear of his life. But perhaps the most dramatic example of the assault on media freedoms occurred in March of last year with the armed invasion of the Clouds Media Group's studios, organized and led by the Regional Commissioner for Dar es Salaam, Paul Makonda. Rather than face the fury of the law, the Regional Commissioner and his armed thugs are still roaming the streets scot-free. Instead, in an unprecedented move, the Minister for Information, who tried to intervene, was not only unceremoniously relieved of his position, he was also prevented at gunpoint from addressing a press conference soon after his sacking. The President has been heard publicly declaring that there is no such thing as media freedom to publish news stories that he or his government does not approve of. Distinguished members, it is not just our journalists and bloggers who are in peril. Our artists have bitterly found out, as many had found out earlier in other countries. In a dictatorship, there is no such thing as artistic freedom. From Mwana Wakotide to Nei Omitego to Roman Katoliki, and more recently Diamond Platinums, our musicians have learned that the only music or art that the rulers of law tolerate is the music or art of praise singers and courtiers, not the rebel music a la Bob Marley or Fela Anikulapo Kuti. Like the latter two, our musicians have also tested ambush in the night and the cold ground of our torture chambers. They too have been kidnapped, tortured, and hauled before the courts of law to face the music for daring to think too independently and too loudly. Even Parliament has been usurped in this struggle against the rule of law and has compliantly passed laws that have been anathema to the rule of law. Examples abound, including laws introducing non-bailable offenses. Their aim is nothing more than to prohibit the courts from granting bail to an accused person merely on the ground of a charge decided entirely by the Director of Public Prosecutions without any independent oversight whatsoever. The insidious and obvious misuse of the majority's power in Parliament to pass these laws is a means used by the government to punish innocent people by imprisoning them as a matter of course without trial. Distinguished members, it is also clear for all to see and hear that in our country in the past couple of years, a dangerous notion has taken hold, that the President is above the law. that it is the president who rules, and it is not the law that rules the president. That the president and his men and women in government can do whatever they want to do without any consequence. Impunity has reigned supreme as a regime of personal power unconstrained by law has become the norm. Just so we know where we stand, where we must stand on this question, please allow me to borrow from what then Judge Kiongozi Barnabas Albert Samata, later the Chief Justice, stated as the legal principle regarding presidential powers and accountability to the law. The occasion was the famous case of Mwalimu Paul John Muhozia versus Attorney General. The notion that the President of the United Republic is above the law is subversive of the Constitution and the laws. All government leaders, including the President, are, like the humblest citizen, bound to comply with the laws of this country. The maxim, "the king can do no wrong," has no place in our law. Everyone and every institution or organization in the country is enjoined to pay respect to the principle of supremacy of the law. Distinguished members, the unprecedented attacks on lawyers, the crude and insidious attempts to control TLS by undermining its autonomy and the integrity of its electoral process, the clampdown on press freedoms and civil liberties of our people have also been visited upon the judiciary. A steady stream of public statements made by the President himself has insinuated that the judiciary is under control of the executive. Statements such as "majaji wetu wanatuelewa," followed by wild applause from the audience, made in conjunction with outrageous attacks on the rule of law, fall under this category. More recently, and in total ignorance or utter disregard of the Judges' Remunerations and the Retirement Benefits Act 2008, the President has publicly castigated judges who go on vacation abroad instead of going to the villages of their parents. Distinguished members, in 2007, Chief Justice Emeritus Samata delivered his farewell address to a packed audience in Dar es Salaam. Aptly titled, "No One is Above the Law," the address dealt inter alia with the subject of the proper relationship between the judiciary and the executive. This eminent and erudite jurist argued that the proper role of the judiciary was, quote-unquote, to consistently check and balance the executive and the legislature. He admonished those who advocate for an unqualified harmony between the judiciary and the executive as having missed their calling. Chief Justice Samata further argued that the judiciary was the bulwark of our democracy and the protector of our people's freedoms. He declared, quote-unquote, "The judiciary must continue to play its role of ensuring that democracy in our country grows and our people enjoy the personal freedoms guaranteed to them by the Constitution of the country. Those exercising state power must never be left in doubt that transgression of the people's basic rights will be met by the fury of the law. Judicial officers must always remember that the implementation of all the other rights ultimately depends upon the proper administration of justice." Elsewhere in his farewell address, Chief Justice Samata passionately adjured the judiciary to protect the rule of law in our country. Anyone attempting to throw the rule of law to the winds must face the consequences authorized by the law. Any abuse of democracy must be admonished. Those who govern and those who are governed must obey the law of the land. Those who purport to regard themselves as the law should be severely dealt with. The message that no one in this country is above the law must be conveyed as loudly and as clearly as possible. Chief Justice Samata would return to these themes 3 years into his active retirement when he turned his sharp pen to the judgment of the full bench of the Court of Appeal on independent candidates in his public lecture to Ruaha University College, Iringa, on 25th November 2010. Distinguished members, no one in their right minds would reject good relations between the government and the bar. Put differently, no member of the bar would wish for conflicts or confrontation between the government and the bar. A harmonious relationship between the government and the bar must, however, be based on sound principle. In my considered view, the sound principle upon which the relationship between the government and the bar must be founded is a respect for legality, human rights, and multi-party democratic values. Our law society must not compromise on these fundamental values if we members are to discharge our duties to the justice system, to the legal profession, and to our fellow citizens. A government that undermines the rule of law, violates fundamental rights and freedoms, and flouts democratic principles cannot and should never expect the support or acquiescence of the independent bar. For if, as Chief Justice Samata argues, to subordinate the judiciary to the executive will usher in a dictatorship in our country, to allow the law society to be silenced or controlled by those in power will lead to the same result. An independent and fearless bar is, in my opinion, a condition precedent to the maintenance of the rule of law, respect for human rights, and the preservation of democracy. These attributes of constitutionalism are impossible if the bar is controlled by the government or is intimidated into silence through threats or actual use of violence against its members. Distinguished members, the new election cycle is upon us. For reasons that are public knowledge, I cannot participate in these elections. However, we have many worthy candidates for all positions in contest. Our work is cut out. As I have shown herein, the issues upon which I stood for election last year are even clearer today. The danger facing lawyers individually and the independent bar collectively is existential. The choice before you, distinguished members, is stark. Let us elect those candidates who we believe are capable of upholding our independence as a National Bar Association. Let us reject those who will compromise that independence by seeking accommodation with the enemies of the rule of law and the other such stakeholders. As Barry Goldwater, the presidential candidate in the 1964 American elections, said, quote unquote, "Moderation in the pursuit of justice is not a virtue." Let us not trust those who will prevaricate or procrastinate on matters of principle. Let us not grant the wish of those whose primary objective for running for election is to burnish their credentials for appointment as judges or other appointed positions by the executive. So, as Giuseppe Garibaldi, the Italian independence hero of the 18th century, said in his 1860 speech to his troops, "To arms, then, all of you, and the oppressors and the mighty shall disappear like dust. Let timid doctrinaires depart from among us to carry their servility and their miserable fears elsewhere. This people is its own master. It will no longer follow in the trail of men whose hearts are foul." As I take leave of you, distinguished members, please allow me one last time to bid you farewell, Garibaldi style. Receive, then, my gallant comrades, young and old, at the honored conclusion of my brief tenure, one word of farewell from me. Today, I'm obliged to retire, but for a short while only. The hour of battle will find me with you again, by the side of the champions of Tanzanian liberty. We shall meet again before long to march to new triumphs. I thank you for your forbearance.